For decades, economists measured human capital with a simple formula: count the years of formal education, add accumulated work experience, and calculate the output. When tracking who fails to enter the workforce, the global standard is the NEET metric: young people who are not in education, employment, or training. This line chart maps OECD youth employment rates, but look closely at the data, and the NEET category diverges into two distinct paths. You have the NEET unemployed, who are actively seeking work, and the NEET inactive, who have withdrawn from the labor force entirely. Nobel laureate James Heckman argued that traditional economic models were missing a critical component. He identified non-cognitive skills, specifically the Big Five personality traits, as measurable, productive characteristics of human capital. To test Heckman's theory on the NEET population, researchers rely on the Russian RLMS-HSE longitudinal dataset, which repeatedly surveys thousands of individuals over time. This data lets us ask a precise question: do internal psychological traits dictate who falls out of the labor market? The numbers reveal a strict pattern. Non-cognitive skills heavily predict labor exclusion during normal economic periods, but when a massive structural shock hits, those same traits are neutralized entirely. Understanding modern labor exclusion requires mapping a worker's psychological profile right up until the economic system itself breaks. We start with cross-sectional data from 2016. This provides a baseline for a normally functioning labor market. This regression table compares education against NEET status. In standard models, formal degrees carry strong statistical significance. Watch the disruption when Big Five traits are introduced. Education coefficients shrink and lose significance, while psychological metrics light up. For the NEET unemployed cohort, two specific traits emerge: low openness to experience and a lack of conscientiousness directly correlate with active job-seeking failure. The NEET inactive cohort presents a different profile. High neuroticism, a metric for emotional instability, strongly predicts total labor force withdrawal, particularly among young women. Once these specific psychological profiles are factored into the math, formal education levels drop out as a significant predictive factor. The traditional education premium acts as a statistical illusion. It masks deeper underlying non-cognitive disparities. Cross-sectional data only shows a single static snapshot in time. To truly measure human capital, economists build dynamic multinomial logit models to track individual transitions over the 2016 to 2017 period. This Sankey diagram tracks young men transitioning from active education downward into the NEET unemployed category. The math shows this transition into job-seeking failure is driven by psychological deficits, specifically low agreeableness and low openness. The model tracks an entirely distinct flow for young women, moving from education directly into total labor inactivity. For this demographic, the transition is driven by low conscientiousness and high neuroticism, limiting their capacity to manage stress. This represents the physical reality of the NEET unemployed population. These are individuals actively seeking work, but failing to secure it due to hidden trait deficits. Lumping these groups together into a broad NEET category obscures the mechanics of the labor market. We are looking at two different destinations driven by distinct psychological failures. In 2020, the global pandemic introduced an exogenous structural shock. A massive external force broke the established mechanics of the labor market. Urban commerce and movement came to a sudden halt. Lockdowns forced the immediate closure of the service and hospitality sectors, severing the primary entry points for youth labor. We can test the limits of human capital theory by running the exact same dynamic transition model on the 2019 to 2020 data, looking to see if non-cognitive skills protected workers during the crisis. This updated flow diagram reveals a statistical collapse. The predictive power of the Big Five traits vanishes entirely in the 2020 data. The massive transition into NEET inactivity spiked uniformly across all personality types. Structural barriers superseded individual resilience. The collapse of formal education and forced caregiving pushed youth out of the labor pool, regardless of psychological profile. Personality traits shield individuals against normal market friction. An exogenous shock acts as a great equalizer, forcing youth into exclusion regardless of human capital. Using survey data for human capital analysis carries a mathematical vulnerability known as endogeneity. This feedback loop illustrates endogeneity as reverse causality. We have to ask, does a poor personality profile cause job loss, or does the trauma of job loss alter a person's personality? The developmental timeline adds another layer of noise. Literature shows the Big Five traits are not fully stabilized in the 15 to 24 age bracket. Furthermore, the extreme stress of the 2020 pandemic taints self-reported survey data. Measuring the exact impact of this equalizing shock is inherently difficult when the respondents themselves are under severe duress. Separating intrinsic human capital from environmental trauma remains a boundary in labor economics. The Russian longitudinal data proves a dual reality regarding Heckman's theories. These side-by-side flow diagrams show that relying purely on formal education as a metric and stable markets is deeply flawed because it ignores the psychological engines of productivity. But there is an ultimate boundary condition. Individual psychological optimization cannot solve structural labor deficits. You cannot train a workforce to overcome an institutional shutdown. Measuring the Big Five provides high-fidelity data on who will fall behind in a functioning market, but it offers zero predictive power when the market itself fails.